Till now, we have discussed various concepts relating to cost accounting, but we have not yet discussed in detail the word that is there in the name of the chapter itself, that is cost. Now, for any activity, a lot of costs is incurred. Production activity, production cost, purchase cost, sale cost, administrative overheads, etc. So, in cost accounting, the costs are classified basis various parameters. You can classify the total cost on the basis of its nature, its functions, behavior, normality, controllability, and costs for managerial decision making. So we are going to look at the categorization of costs basis each of these six parameters. So first, let us see how costs can be classified basis its nature. Now suppose you are in the business of stitching and sale of clothes. So first of all, you will have to buy the raw materials. So for making clothes, the major raw material will be thread, cloth, cloth, buttons. Let us say these three are the raw materials because this will go directly into the cloth. You cannot stitch without a thread. You will have to put buttons on your shirt, trousers, or whatever dress you make, and the cloth is the main material. Now, this raw material you're going to put in a stitching machine. You will need a machine to stitch the cloth. Now, that machine will need certain raw material for its maintenance, such as oil, lubricants. Without putting oil or lubricant in the machine might not work properly and the final clothes will not come out properly. So these are also important raw materials. But okay, let's leave it here. Then you will need labor. Who will work on this machine to give you the final product. So there will be few people, say 10 people, who will be stitching the cloth. But now if you have a company for this, you will need other people also to help in this purpose. Suppose these are the 10 people who are actually sitting on this machine and doing the stitching work. But you will also have supervisors. Now, you will have to clean the place where this production activity is going on. So we'll need cleaning staff, and other maintenance worker such as peons, clerks, etc., who serve you tea, coffee, and all. So we have seen there are two types of staff. One are those people who are directly working on the machine to make the clothes, and the other are the support staff, you can say, such as the maintenance workers, supervisors, etc. Now, you're producing this clothes. Say out of 10 cloth that you have produced, there might be one which is defective. The thread broke during the production process, or the stitching was not so perfect, so you cannot sell them in the market, etc. So this is one kind of an expense, because obviously you cannot sell this defective product in the market, but you have incurred the raw material cost, labor cost, etc. for making this cloth piece. Now you're sitting in a room where this production activity is going on. So this is called the factory. That is where the actual production is going on, where all the machines are set up. So you will have to pay electricity charges for this factory, maintenance charges, rent, etc. Everything will have to be paid for this factory. Now this was only the manufacturing process. You will also have other people who will be helping you with the sales, distribution, etc. You will need, say, an accounts department to maintain books of accounts, HR department to manage the human resources, that is the people, selling, sales department to ensure that these clothes are finally sold in the market. So now they will also be working in a room. So you'll have to incur the rent, electricity charges, maintenance charges, etc. for this room as well. So we see that overall there are so many expenses that are being incurred. So now the first one, that was a thread, clothes, button, etc. These raw materials will directly go into the final product. The final product is the cloth. So these are the direct material. Then oil, lubricants, etc. These are important, but this lubricant will not be there in the clothes that you sell in the market. It is used for the machinery. So these are indirect material. Now labor. There are few people who will be doing the stitching activity. So this is the direct labor who is working on the finished product. Now there are some support staff such as maintenance worker, cleaning staff, etc. These are indirect labor. They are not working directly on the finished product, but are helping those who are working on the finished product. Next we have the expense of the defective cloth. This is a direct expense, whereas electricity, maintenance, etc. are indirect expenses. These are not directly related to the finished product, but it helps in the production activity. Then the accounts, HR, sales, etc. For this, the staff employed, rent, electricity, these are all indirect expenses. They are not related to the production of the final product, but they help in the production activities and other functions of the company. So we have seen that basis the nature of the cost, we can divide it into 6 categories: direct material, indirect material, direct labor, indirect labor, direct expenses and indirect expenses. Now let us take a quick look at all the costs. So, on the basis of elements or nature, the cost can be divided as first is the material cost. So, the material cost is again direct and indirect. So, the direct material cost was example clothes, button, cloth, button, etc. The indirect cost was lubricants, oil, etc. Now, labor cost can also be divided into two, direct and indirect. So, direct labor cost were the people who were involved in the actual production activity, such as stitching, and indirect labor cost was the supervisors, maintenance worker, etc. Next, we had the other expenses. They can also be divided into two, direct and indirect. So direct expense will be, say, the cost of defective work, and indirect expenses can be, say, power, rent, insurance, etc. Now, all these indirect costs, that is indirect material cost, indirect labor cost, and indirect other expenses, are actually known as overheads. So we can say that there are actually three kinds of expenses. One is a direct material cost. Number two is a direct labor. And number three are the overheads. The overheads comprise of all the indirect expenses. Now, you can divide these overheads again on the basis of the functions. The first being production overheads, that is the stitching activity. So that will be the factory rent, the factory electricity, etc. So all the extra costs which are being incurred on the factory, because factory is the place where the production activity is going on. Next, the administration overheads. So this is the office rent, office electricity, etc. That is basically where other departments like accounts, HR sits and function from. Then is the selling overhead, people who are involved in selling the finished product. So the overheads can be advertisement, commission to sales officer, etc. And last is the distribution, that is the people who are actually selling it, distributing it to the market. So जैसे कि once the goods have been produced, it will be stored in a warehouse. From the warehouse, the goods will be physically transported to the market. So in the distribution charges, distribution overheads, there will be warehouse cost, loading charge, etc. So now basis the industries, the examples of this cost can change. For some industry, lubricant may be a direct cost. Suppose you are in the business of maintenance of machinery. Now, for maintaining the machinery, you will need oils and lubricants which will directly go into the machine which you are repairing. So then that will become a direct cost. So basis the industries from company to company, the examples will vary. I've tried to explain all these costs considering the industry, considering you're in the business of stitching and selling of the clothes. Now we are going to see the categorization of cost basis the functions. The functions are the various departments. In the last we saw that there are basically three kinds of cost: direct material, direct labor, and the overheads. Now these four, production, administration, selling, and distribution, are various functions or departments of an enterprise. So the cost incurred on each of these functions will be separate costs. So on the basis of functions, direct material and direct labor, these two are the major costs. For any activity, any production activity, you will need these two types of costs at least. So these are known as the prime cost. Then you're going to work in a factory. For that factory, you will have to incur rent, insurance, etc. So if we add to this the factory overheads, we'll get the total factory cost. So the factory cost is a function which comprises of the direct material and the direct labor costs plus all the factory overheads such as the rent of factory, electricity, insurance, etc. Now, other than production, you have to got to manage your business, for which you need accounts department, HR department, etc. So these will be your administrative overheads, such as the office rent, electricity, etc. So with this, we'll get the total cost of goods sold. We have taken into account all the costs that are incurred in the factory as well as all the costs that are incurred on the administrative functions such as HR, accounts, etc. Now once the goods have been produced, you have to sell them in the market. So you will incur selling and distribution overheads such as advertisement, warehouse cost, etc. So this will give us the final cost of sales, the total cost that has been incurred by the company on that finished product, whether directly or indirectly. So on the basis of functions, we have the factory overheads, administrative overheads, and selling and distribution overheads. Direct material and direct labor are the prime cost, that is a major cost. Factory overheads are all the costs that are incurred, all the indirect expenses that are incurred with respect to the factory. Factory is where the actual production activity takes place. Administrative overheads are all the costs that are incurred on the support functions such as accounts, HR, etc., such as office rent, electricity. And last, selling and distribution overheads are the costs that are incurred for the activities selling and physically sending the goods from the warehouse to the market for distribution to the customers. So basis functions, we have factory overheads, administrative overheads, selling and distribution overheads. Next we have variability. Now suppose in one shirt you're putting 5 buttons. If you produce 10 shirts, you will need 50 buttons. If you produce 100 shirts, you will need 500 buttons. So as the production is increasing, the number of buttons, that is the raw material, is also increasing. So the quantity of buttons that you will need actually depends on the number of finished goods you want to produce. If you want 100 shirts, you'll need 500 buttons. 1000 shirts, 5000 buttons. So this raw material is a variable cost. With a change in the production quantity, the requirement will also change. Suppose for your production activity, you have rented a 10 square feet warehouse at rupees 10,000 per month. So suppose in the month of January, you have produced 500 shirts in this in this factory premises. In the month of February, you have produced say 1,000 shirts. In the month of March, the demand was not very good, and so you just produced 200 shirts. So the buttons that you will need in the month of Jan will be 2500. In the month of February, you will be needing 5000, and in the month of March, 1000. That is basis the finished goods that you produced. But the rent in all these 3 months will remain the same. You will have to pay to the owner 10,000 rupees in all these 3 months. Owner is not concerned whether you make a lakh finished product or just a single good in the factory premise. So we see that whereas the buttons requirement is changing with the finished product, the rent is remaining constant no matter how many units you produce. So direct material, the buttons is a direct material that is a variable cost, and rent is a fixed cost. Suppose you have, say, electricity costs. So you have negotiated with a company who is going to supply you with electricity. So the company says that for the first 100 units of electricity consumed, you will have to pay rupees 10,000 no matter how much you consume. Say in the month, okay, and after 100 units, for each additional unit, you will have to pay 10 rupees extra. So suppose in the month of Jan, the electricity consumed was 50 units. In the month of Feb, electricity consumed was 110 units. Again, in the month of March, electricity consumed is say 90 units. So in the month of Jan, even though you have just consumed 50 units, you will have to pay 10,000 rupees. In the month of Feb, for the first 100 units, you have to pay 10,000 plus 100 rupees for the 10 additional units consumed. In the month of March, since you have consumed only 90 units, you'll again have to pay 10,000. So we see that up to 100 units, the cost is not changing. You consume 10 units, then also you'll have to pay 10,000 rupees. You consume 50, then also 10,000, 90, then also 10,000, even 99, then also 10,000. But once you have crossed that threshold of 100 units, with each additional unit, your cost will increase. If you've used 110 units, then for the 10 extra unit, you'll have to pay 100 rupees extra. If you used 120 units, you'll have to pay 10,000 plus 200 rupees extra. So we see that up to a certain point, 100 units in this case, the cost is remaining same. But after that threshold, it is changing with the increase in the consumption. So this is the semi-variable cost. So we have seen that basis variability, the costs can be categorized as variable cost, fixed cost, and semi-variable cost. Variable cost is as the production will increase, the cost will also change. You produce 10 units, the cost will be say 100 rupees. You produce 100 units, the cost will be 1000 units. Fixed cost is the cost does not depend on how many units you produce. That is, the rent will remain fixed whether you produce 100 units or you produce 1 lakh units. Semi-variable costs are those costs which remain fixed up to a certain level, but after that limit, the costs changes with each extra unit consumed by the entity. So till now, we have seen the classification of costs basis 3 parameters. First was the element on the basis of elements. We had direct material cost, indirect material cost, direct labor, indirect labor, and direct other expenses, indirect other expenses. On the basis of functionality, we had prime costs, factory overheads, administrative overheads, selling and distribution overheads. And on the basis of variability or behavior, we had fixed cost, variable cost, and semi-variable cost. Classification of costs on the basis of other 3 parameters, that is controllability, normality, and costs for managerial decision making, we will cover in our next video. Hope the concepts were clear to you. If you have any doubts, you can post them in the comment section below. If you like the video, do share and subscribe.